Welcome to Everything Co-op, bringing you information on how cooperatives can help improve your quality of life. This show is being sponsored by the National Co-op Bank, NCB. The NCB is dedicated to strengthening communities nationwide for the delivery of banking and financial services for the nation's cooperatives, their members, and other socially responsible organizations. For more information on the power of community ownership, visit ncb.coop. That's ncb.coop. Now stay tuned for your host, Vernon Oakes.
Good morning, everybody. This is Vernon Oakes. Welcome to Everything Cooperative this beautiful Thursday morning. And you know, I am excited that we're going to talk to Miss Silvia Salazar this morning. Good morning, Silvia.
Good morning, Vernon.
How are you today?
Good. Enjoying the nicer weather.
Yes, it is great weather. I rode my motorcycle up this morning.
Nice.
Listen, how did you get involved in co-ops?
I think it was out of necessity. Living here in D.C. when I first moved here, I lived in a rent-controlled building, and it was a slum building, and we wanted it to get it fixed up, and we organized, we wrote letters, we did everything one is supposed to do to get the building fixed, and that didn't work. And over a period of 7 years of trying to get housing code violations fixed, we realized that the only option was to buy our building and own it as a co-op, so everybody would have that opportunity for home ownership and shared wealth as well. And that's kind of how it started for me, and I've been hooked ever since.
Well, okay, I'm hooked. Sylvia, what year was this that you started?
Oh, I think it was about 2005 that we started organizing. But out of that organizing work, we're now working on organizing worker-owned cooperatives here in D.C. So, you know, housing is important, and once you have that secure, what happened to us is we started to look around and realize, like, okay, what's the next step is having secure employment and dignified work. And so it was like a natural progression for folks to start looking at having just a stable job where they actually would have ownership of it.
You're saying so much. I want to break it down a little bit because dignified work. Okay, so you're saying what I have been preaching now on this program for 4 years and longer. I got involved with co-ops because I started managing co-ops. So I started managing housing co-ops, and I learned about co-ops by that method. And now I live in a housing co-op. And
do you?
Yeah, I got really turned on, as it sounds like you did, for co-ops. And I found that most people don't know about it. So that's why I'm so excited about talking to you this morning. But let's go back to, let's break down this. Okay, I'm in a multifamily unit. It's a rent control unit. It's, I don't know, roach infested, housing codes, whatever it is, it's not providing safe, affordable, decent housing, right? Mm-hmm. Okay.
Right.
So how did you learn about co-ops to say, hey, let's own this thing. Let's do this?
Because I think it was basically a process of elimination. I mean, we'd work with the management company who managed the property when we were still tenants. And we realized, like, you really have to be involved and invested in what's happening if you really want things to change. And, you know, our building had mold. It had a non-working elevator, a lot of problems. And the harder we tried to get things fixed, we filed, I think it was 3 lawsuits at one point. And we were so proactive about getting things fixed, and it just didn't work, whatever we tried. And I think as we talked to other folks in the community, such as LEDC, the Latino Economic Development Center, or TNAC, just hearing from them kind of what was happening in the community, and in particular, housing organizers with LEDC, they talked about housing cooperatives and how you could create ownership and people's credit would not be a requirement because it's the co-op that owns the building and not necessarily every individual person. So it just seemed like a great fit for us in terms of where we evolved and in terms of our organizing and what we needed.
So I really want people to hear this, that one of the reasons that housing co-op is a great option is that the individual resident who was a tenant, you were a tenant at first, your credit score is not what people are looking at in order to get the money.
Right.
The individual credit is not there. So the association, the housing co-op, is the one that borrows the money, and it's called a blanket loan, and it's over the whole multifamily. How many units is it? How many families?
Ours is 83.
83 families. So that those 83 families, they may have credit scores of 400, 500, 600, maybe 700 or 800, but highly unlikely. A credit score that high normally means there's either no credit or they have a lot of income coming in. So you got 83 families, and the individual does not have to qualify for credit. It is the organization that has to qualify for the credit. Great. Okay. So you all got excited and wanted to own your own.
Yes.
Okay. Talk about the process. Now, what is LEDC?
Oh, that is a nonprofit here in D.C. It's called the Latino Economic Development Center, and they pursue economic opportunities for all communities in D.C. and Maryland. So that means they help people start businesses. So they do that end of it, like the business side of things for, minority-owned small businesses and things like that. But then they also do the other side of organizing work around buildings that are up for sale because of the Tenant Opportunity to Purchase Act law. They organize for that as well. And they also do education for folks that kind of need to learn about their credit and kind of being a bit more stable financially. And full disclosure, I also happen to be the board chair for LEDC. So
fantastic. How'd you get that? Okay.
Yeah.
Wait a minute. So you were a tenant in this rundown place, 83 units, and you and your neighbors got involved, right? And you first sued the owner to try to get them to fix housing code violations. Mold is hazardous to people's health. I mean, people can die from ingesting mold into their lungs. So you all got started. And the reason I'm saying this is because this is where co-ops get formed, is when people come together, 3, 4, 5 people come together and say, look, we've got to do something. We've got a community problem. And you end up saying, let's form a co-op and own this thing. So we control it, we can manage it, and we can then fix things. Does that kind of sum up what you all were doing at first?
Yeah, exactly. We were just trying to have a decent place to live. And, we had the D.C. housing inspectors come out, and they cited our building with over 200 housing code violations. That's how bad our building was.
Wow. And this happens in D.C., in any city, in any rural country, in rural community, and internationally. We've been on now 4 years. October was our 4th year. And that first year, we had a gentleman named Papa Sin who was from Senegal, and they created a co-op because of the need for housing. They didn't have rundown housing or housing that had code violations. They had no housing, so they built homes. And I think their story sounds very much like yours. Now, Latino Economic Development Center, is that only for people that speak Spanish or from Latin countries?
No, not at all. It's the staff there works with people of all ancestries, all languages, English, Spanish, Amharic. They work with African Americans. So it's just very wide open in terms of who they serve. So it's definitely something that folks should feel free to reach out to, whether it's to, learn about their credit and improving their credit, if they want to start their own business, if they want to start saving money to buy their own home, or if they have housing issues in their building and they want to do something about it and start to organize. So it's an amazing organization, and I'm really grateful to serve.
Latino Economic Development Center. What's their webpage?
ledcmetro.org.
ledcmetro.org webpage. And a telephone number?
They have a few telephone numbers, actually, for D.C. and for Maryland, because we've actually expanded a bit. So I'll have to share that with you later. Maybe you could put it up on your website.
Would love to do that.
Yes.
Now, there are other organizations around. There's MICASA, MANA, Housing Counseling Services. Do you work with those? Does LEDC work with those organizations, or are you sort of stand alone?
No, we actually, LADC works, for example, with Mikasa to organize, I think it's quarterly, what they're called co-op clinics.
Mm-hmm.
And basically, it's an ongoing training program for people who live in co-ops who want to learn about how co-ops function and who, for example, want to know how to work better with their management company. If they need to make changes to the structure of their co-op, how do they go about doing it? What are some resources available for co-ops? For example, if you're an older co-op and you need to rehab your building, or if you need a new roof or something, what resources are there? So these organizations will come together to offer and support and services and support to existing co-ops.
Now, you said you were working with your management company when it was a dump, and they helped you. Are they still your management company? Did they serve you well then?
They did not. They basically had to, because we were facing condo developers who wanted to buy our building. They offered us a payout so that we could move out and, move somewhere else, and they were going to convert this building to condos. So we really weren't in favor of that. And the management company was basically, they were working with the landlord. I mean, they were hired by the landlord.
Mm-hmm.
So for us, as soon as we bought the building, we knew immediately we were going to interview some management companies, and we were going to hire one. And that management company would be accountable only to us and no one else. And that was so hugely empowering to actually go from, facing intimidation and discrimination from the existing management company to like turning around and saying, no, we're going to hire our own and we're going to work closely with them. It was a total change of night and day for us.
Well, the reason I went back there is I thought I heard you say they were very helpful to you. So I'm glad I went back. I was going to ask you to do a shout out for them, but if they weren't, let's leave it alone. Okay, let's leave it alone.
Not at all. And, they were working with the condo developer and the owner. But, it's interesting that we're talking about this period because, for us, we've moved on from that, and now we're looking at the needs.
Looking at what?
The community here. We're looking at employment needs and economic stability.
Yeah, I want to go there in the next segment or two. We only have another minute on this segment, but I really wanted to get the foundation of why co-op. Community need says co-ops, it empowers, and you've said a lot of the right words. You got empowered. We also talked about financial. You said that, you could get financial wealth by doing this. So I wanted to break down some of the benefits of co-ops first that you've experienced, and then from there we can go to the other things that you're doing. I'm just excited. Listen, we've got to take our first break. If you have a call if you want a question or comment to Silvia, please call in at 1-800-450-7876. 1-800-450-7876. We'll be right back. Please don't touch the dial.
Washington, D.C.'s News Talk, 1450 AM WOL and 95.9 FM.
Information is power. This is Vernon Oaks. The program is Everything Cooperative. And WOL is a great partner for this show because the National Cooperative Bank helped to sponsor this show to give you information that if you use this information, you have power. And this is what Silvia Salazar has found out as she was working with her other tenants. And they bought the building and they got power. That's pretty much the last thing she said. It was very empowering to get their own management company that works for them and not for the landlord or the condo developers or whomever else it might be. Sylvia, how long have you had the housing co-op?
We were incorporated in July 2011.
So 2011 to 17, you're 6 years, a couple months. Mm-hmm. Okay. Can we talk a little bit more about the housing co-ops, and then I want to go into the worker co-ops, probably the next segment, and then child care co-ops, sure, the fourth segment? Okay.
Sure. Mm-hmm.
So in those 6 years, what have you found? A little background. In managing co-ops, I have found out that you need good governance and good management in order to be successful. And it starts with the governance because they have the responsibility, the fiscal responsibility. They're the ones that are in control and will be held accountable if the unit doesn't work well. When they hire somebody to help them, that's a management company and a lawyer, an accountant, they hire all of these other professionals. And then secondly, they need good management that will do what they say do and implement the policies. And the good for me, Silvia, is that there's integrity and knowledge. And I heard you talk about the co-op clinics to help you get the knowledge, but the integrity is following the bylaws and the rules, the policies, and for everybody the same. Not having some people get more of this and others get less of that. So have you found that to be true? And tell me a little bit about how the governance work and with the management.
So the governance for us is based on our bylaws that we established at the time when we incorporated. And we do our best to follow the bylaws to the best of our ability. But, when you're working, and I think this is inherent to all co-ops, is you're working with people. And there's different personalities, different family needs, different perspectives. I mean, there's people here in our building who have lived here their whole entire lives. And there's one board member, she's 31, and she's now raising her family here. So there's multi-generational housing. But then there's folks who are young working professionals who are just moving into the city. So there's differences of opinion and perspective in that kind of dynamic. But I think it's that kind of like different perspectives and kind of working them out. I think that's part of working and living in a community, right? Because any other building, you live in a silo, you do your own thing, you don't know your neighbors. Here we know each other, and we do our best to support each other's needs. But I think part of that dynamic is that there is going to be some friction and some issues there. And that's just part of the process, I think. But I prefer this and having our own sovereignty over what happens to our property instead of someone else coming and telling us for us, it's like, when is the rent going to go up, or the carrying charge? We decide when the monthly payments go up. No one decides that for us. So having that sovereignty and that ability to decide those things is kind of like the trade-off to kind of dealing with the people side of it.
Well, I want to throw a little something in here that a co-op lawyer told me. He's out of Chicago. He's been 60 years in co-ops, developing and helping. He said that it really is rent. Because we've told it's not rent, it's co-op fees, maintenance fees, it's all kinds of other terms. But he said you really, in your occupancy agreement, it is like a lease, and your leaseor, like your old landlord, is the cooperative. And you basically have a lease with the cooperative, and you have to pay rent or co-op fee or maintenance fee, whatever you want to call it. But I used to really, because there's some people say it's not rent, you own it. But
right.
And that makes sense the way he said, what he told it, because I did basically the same thing. I said, quote, rent, unquote. He said, it really is rent. So the key, though, is you and the other 83 members, the 83 members elect a board. How many people on your board? 5, 7, 9? 7.
We have 7 floors, and so when we were establishing the co-op, we realized it'd be good to have representation of 7 people given the distribution of the building.
Fantastic. So you got 7 people that the 83 will elect, and then they make decisions. In some cases, the bylaws will say for rent increases, you have to go back to the membership and get them to approve it before you can affect it. And some others say the board can make that decision.
Right.
But they make it. And there's one critical piece of this. You're not concerned about profit.
No,
Okay.
It doesn't even enter our frame of thought at all. That's right.
Yeah. And that's one of the reasons, there's been research that says that looking at HUD-sponsored co-ops compared to HUD-sponsored apartment buildings, and there's one particular property in Atlanta where the rent was $200 to $300 less than the co-op after 40 years, which was 45 to 50% lower. The rent was $500 at the co-op, and the rent was $700 to $800 in an apartment building down the street. And the co-op building was better than the ones of the apartment buildings because in the co-op, the board would choose to fix things.
It's in your self-interest to have a good working roof and plumbing and electrical.
Yeah. Oh, I love this. Listen, now we don't need profit, but you do need surplus. You need savings.
Yes.
And so what caused those rents to be so much lower was one of the big pieces was that 10-20% profit that the investor would want, and over time as you have increase, and that causes that gap to go up. Plus, once people know they own it, they normally take better care of it.
Yes.
Now
Definitely.
The attitude.
And I think that's a process. Yeah, definitely. And the thing is, we have to change and we're still going through it. I think to some extent for people who were tenants before. It's not only the change of the building, but a change of how you see yourself in your home.
Yeah.
And you're not a tenant anymore. You're a member of a co-op, and you have an equal share in what happens in the building. So that's a change of mentality too. And I think we talk about the external aspects of the building, but I think there's something that happens internally to us who go through this process. Absolutely.
And I have found that is not automatic, that change of attitude, change of mentality of tenant to owner. And once that happens, though, all of your 83 people may not make that change, and you have to live with. But if you can get 50 of them, that would be wonderful. Great.
Yeah. And then leading by example, I think that's helpful too.
Are you on the board of the co-op, housing co-op?
Yes, I am.
You're on the board there. So what's your education? I was talking to my grandson last night and was saying that the way one speaks often tells whether or not they're educated or not, and their logic flow, and you sound like you're very educated.
Oh, it wasn't by design. It just happened that way. I actually grew up in Los Angeles. For my undergraduate studies, I went to UCLA, and I majored in English and Spanish literature. And then I did some fellowships. That's kind of how I ended up in D.C. or kind of learned about it. And then I also went to school at Baruch College in New York. Got a master's degree in public administration. Then did a graduate fellowship at Harvard, at the Kennedy School, and then most recently at George Washington University, I did health information technology graduate degree as well. So
Master's or doctorate?
Master's. Although if you put them all together, I would have had a doctorate by now.
Or two. I got it.
Yeah.
I got it.
Yeah.
You
so
said
it's been a bit.
It's been what?
It's been a lot of kind of going between universities and stuff. I didn't do it on purpose. It just kind of happened. It wasn't planned out.
But I was going to go back to that because you said it earlier. What do you mean by not on purpose? It just happened.
Well, all of this, my life changed. It was my senior year at UCLA. I couldn't cut it. I was having a really hard time with classes. I couldn't concentrate. I was tired all the time. I get dizzy. And I got kicked out. You don't make the grade, you get kicked out, right? That's what happens to you. And so I decided to just take any community job. I felt like a failure. Oh, my God, I couldn't cut it in school. All this effort that my family put in for me to get to this point in my life. And I finally had a job that had health insurance, and I got a physical for the first time ever in my life because I never really had that before. And, I told the doctor, look, I get dizzy and this happens to me. And they sent me to see a neurologist and an ear, nose, and throat specialist, and they came back with a diagnosis of a brain tumor. And they needed to do surgery right away. And, they were all like that. My whole life stopped, and it was just about this one thing. And that experience really impacted me in terms of, and I was thankfully, I did the surgery, had the very long rehab where I had to get, the ability to walk again, and I had paralysis that I had to do a lot of therapy for, and eventually I came out of it. But one of the things that really informed my experience was the fact that I was able to navigate the healthcare system and get a good result from my surgery because I was educated. And I realized that not everybody has that same result.
Amen.
And, you were talking just now about how you can tell how educated someone is by how they speak. I took advantage of that. And when I talked to the neurologist, I'm like, well, what about second opinion?
Well,
I did research on my own.
Sylvia, I want to come back and talk about that. Please, we'll be right back, everybody.
Washington, D.C.'s News Talk, 1450 AM WOS and 95.9 FM.
Welcome back, everybody. This is Vernon Oaks, and The program is Everything Cooperative, but right before the program, our guest Silvia Salazar was talking about her experience as a senior at UCLA, having dizzy spells and got kicked out for poor grades, and then ended up getting health insurance. That's why health insurance is so important today in today's political conversation. And she took a physical for the first time, and I assume you were around 20, 21 years old, first time having a physical, and found out she had a brain tumor and then went to work. Wow. Silvia, what I have found out in my life is that a disease, brain tumors or diabetes or blood pressure, hearts, a disease is what I've come to call it's a dis-ease. And a dis-ease is an opportunity to change your life. Mm-hmm. And very much. That's what you did.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, that's what I just realized. Like, I had skills, and not everybody has these skills. And I was in the ICU, and of course I had tubes coming out of me, and I was on the morphine drip. But one of the things, the life goals that I made for myself at that moment was I wanted to go to graduate school, and I wanted to move to D.C. to be an advocate for people in healthcare. And thankfully, I've been able to work in healthcare. I've been now at the NIH doing social science research for the last 14 years.
Wait a minute. So you're at NIH? Mm-hmm. National Institute of Health?
Yes. Mm-hmm. That's my job. That's
doing
my regular
research.
Job.
Research on healthcare?
Cancer. Yeah, we do research. I particularly do research on cancer. And just full disclosure, I'm not representing the NIH at this point. I'm just telling you where I work.
Okay.
To disclose that.
Now, I would suggest to you, you said your education was not on purpose, it just happened. Mm-hmm. I want to challenge that statement. Mm-hmm. See, I think it was on purpose. You just didn't know it. Okay.
Yeah, there was definitely another plan that I didn't know about. Absolutely. Yeah, because, opportunities popped up, and I was like, yes, I'm going to go for that. Yes, I'm going to do this. And, I pursued them when I saw them. It wasn't like they were just given to me, right? I had to apply and compete and everything.
Yeah, they didn't just happen. That's why I wanted you to go back to that when you first said it in the start of the program. But the whole universe sort of conspired to make it happen, even put you in ICU so you could be there and get it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yep.
And you made a life go. Okay.
Yeah, and so that brought me here to D.C. to live in a rent-controlled building. That was a slum building, and,
Now, why did you go to that building? I assumed that maybe the rent was low or something. And
the rent was affordable, and I was a fellow on Capitol Hill, and I couldn't afford anything more, and it was close enough, and it was in the city. That's what I wanted, to live in the city in D.C. So it filled my basic requirements, and I figured I wouldn't live in the building for very long. That didn't turn out to be true.
Okay. So it didn't just happen. It happened. Okay. But I want to suggest to you something else about co-ops. You had a physical disease, a personal physical disease, but a community has diseases too. And it shows up as poor housing, unemployment, no child care, no transportation, no health care. All of these different diseases for a community. And what a lady named Dame Pauline Green was on the program. She was the president of the International Cooperative Alliance. I think she served her 8 years, and now she's no longer the president. But she said cooperatives brings people out of poverty with dignity. Mm-hmm. And I really like that because all of the things you were talking about earlier, that people have a say, they get financial wealth, they also get social wealth, they get political wealth, they understand how different parts of the government work. So it helps a whole community. And if a community doesn't have a problem, a disease, then there's no need for a co-op. Mm-hmm. So that's what I've learned on this program, and it's exciting to hear your life story and your life goals. Wow. Okay, so now I want to change it a little bit to, you've got a housing co-op that's working, you set your rents, co-op fee, whatever you want to call it. You have bylaws that you manage by a 7-unit 7-member board of directors. Now it's functioning, it's working, it's going, and you keep getting educated. So you mentioned earlier about unemployment. So tell me what road you're walking down to solve that disease, that community problem of lack of employment, of lack of, you called it something else. Dignified work. Yes. Mm-hmm. What are you doing there?
Yeah. Well, once housing is taken care of and you don't have to worry about dealing with those kinds of challenges, you start to look around and you see what other needs are there in my life. And I think that's the beautiful thing of organizing and coming together as a community is you're aware of the other forces in your life and kind of how those things come together. So for the women here, they, a lot of them work 2 or 3 jobs in the service sector. And it's really difficult to raise a family because you can't just have one job anymore. You need at least 2 or 3 jobs to support your family. And if you don't have a lot of education, if your English isn't that great, you're going to put up with work that doesn't really treat you fairly. They might not give you sick days. And they might consider you that you're not so valuable because you don't have those extra skills, the degrees and all of that. And so for the women that I met, and this is women I've met in the community and also in my building, but they wanted to have a job where they would actually have a say over things, just like they have a say here in the co-op. That was very important to them, and so they sought that opportunity out.
Have you read the book Cities Building Wealth?
I haven't.
Okay.
I'm writing it down.
Okay. Cities Building Wealth is the name. It's a pamphlet, and Democracy Collaborative wrote it. And they speak of a lady by the name of Christina in the book. Christina is Mexican, immigrant. She was making $7 an hour cleaning houses, maid service, if you will, in the service industry that you were talking about. They formed a co-op, and her salary, her hourly wage went from $7 an hour to $20 an hour.
Oh.
Yes. Now, when I've talked about this to folks, and it was a worker cooperative. And let me real quickly say to people that are listening, a cooperative depends on the type of cooperative, depends on who owns and controls it, the business. If the employees own and control the business, it's called a worker cooperative. So Christina in New York was in a worker cooperative. The employees owned it. The other type is consumer cooperatives, and that is the consumers, the people that uses the products or services, own and control the business. Housing co-op is an example. Credit unions are an example. Food co-ops could be a consumer cooperative, or it could be a worker cooperative. And there's one consumer cooperative in Washington State, I think in Seattle, that's a hybrid. It's both. The consumers own it and the employees own it. And then there's a couple other type of the 4 major types of co-ops, and a lot of farmers and artists are using these 2 types. It's a purchasing cooperative. People come together to buy goods or services, and they normally get the knowledge about, they have an organization that gets the knowledge about these products or services and these vendors, and they buy in bulk so they get a better product at a lower price normally. And the farmers have been using this model for ages, and now artists are beginning to use it. And sometimes they buy equipment and share the equipment, or artists are buying warehouses so they'll have space to do what they need to do. And some musicians, because the income is so erratic, Silvia, that they are looking at ways of how to, spread out the income so that they know that they can eat and have housing all year round.
Stabilize that.
Yeah, and then the other side of it is a marketing cooperative, and the marketing cooperative are the ones that come together and market the products, and artists and farmers are doing that, and organizations like Cabot Creamery or Cabot Cheese. Oh, I'm losing names right now. But there's a lot of different companies, and I was getting ready to think about farm companies that will market the products. In the district right now, we have REI, which is a consumer cooperative, and they sell recreational equipment is what they sell, and it's a new building. They've been around since 1938. And we have a new CPA, Community Purchasing Alliance, that I've been trying to get.
You had them on your show, right? Didn't you get them on their show recently?
They've been on a couple times, but I've been trying to get housing co-ops to join them and buy from them. Normally with management companies, I've found that the housing co-ops, unlike churches and charter schools, have decent contracts with getting utilities or trash or different vendors. But that some of the churches were getting ripped off, paying double of what I would say they should have been paying or they're paying now. So they've gotten great savings by joining these co-ops. So these are the different types. So now you're looking at creating worker-owned cooperatives to handle this unemployment problem you're talking about?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and to have like income stability, to have sick days, to have a good stable salary, to actually have your own business, like all of those things come with just being part of a worker-owned cooperative.
So have you started one yet, or are you doing the research?
No, we actually started doing the organizing work back in late 2015, and we now have a group of 10 women that are part of the co-op, and the name of the co-op is called Co-Familia, Co-Family Child Development Center. Again, it's a cooperative, and we're actually in the process of setting up our bylaws right now. We're collaborating with various organizations that are providing support, like, for example, 1DC. We also got some funding from a foundation to do the organizing work, and we did a learning journey earlier this summer, actually, because I wanted the women for the childcare cooperative, I wanted them to understand the different types of co-ops. And so we took a learning journey to Philadelphia this summer, and they met with one of the oldest childcare cooperatives in the country. And we also went to consumer co-ops and farming co-ops, and it kind of really opened up the world for them in terms of what's possible. And they were able to ask questions about some of the things that we're looking at in terms of organizing, like how many members do you need to start? How did you get started? What challenges did you face? And what was it like to do this for you? And all of that kind of world. So I know I just told you a lot, so we'll go over it. So I know.
I couldn't get right. I'm taking notes, but I couldn't get them all down. It's one.
Yeah.
So that you can ask a lot of. Now, you know there's a child care co-op here in Greenbelt.
I've heard of it, yes. Uh-huh.
Okay. I've tried to get them on the show, and they said they're too busy. And it's the same thing.
That, yeah,
the same. There's one on Capitol Hill. And I've visited them, and there was a father who was working there, and it was kind of nice talking to them. And I really wanted to get child co-ops because that seems to be, once you have housing, one of the stops people from working is child care, and affordable, particularly child care. And a co-op can bring that good child care because the parents are in there working and volunteering. If it's consumer owned, that the parents own it. We got to take our last break, and we're going to come back and talk more about child care and others. Yeah, the time goes by. I'm really enjoying this. Please, everybody out there, if you have a question, call in at 1-800-450-7876, and we'll be right back.
Washington, D.C.'s News Talk, 1450 AM WOF and 95.9 FM.
Welcome back, everybody. This is Vernon Oaks. The program is Everything Cooperative, and we're having a wonderful conversation with Silvia Salazar. Silvia, talk to me about this co-op. How's it working? You've got 10 members for a child development center. How's it going?
It's been going well. I think we're just before the break. I think we were talking about some of the milestones that we've reached, and also what part of it. It isn't just about establishing the organization. Getting your bylaws and kind of doing all those governance things. It actually also has to do with supporting the women through the process of changing how they see themselves in their relationship to work, and seeing themselves as owners instead of workers, and all of that. So it's been an effort on both ends to do both. And as an organizer, I try to maintain those at the same level, because if one gets ahead of the other, then they don't connect very well. And so we're taking our time in doing that. Well,
we were talking about attitude going from a tenant to an owner, And it's the same kind of attitudinal change going from an employee, a worker, somebody working for somebody, to an owner of a company. And we've had several worker cooperatives here talking about you have to do your work and you have to manage it. So there's some dynamics that happen. One guy said he was the chair of the board of it. He's a worker. He's the chair of the board, and they had a president or chief executive officer. So sometimes he would be in a meeting and he would be taking orders, if you will, from the chief executive officer, and some other times he would be in another meeting as the chairman of the board. The chief executive officer would be taking orders from him. So I found that very fascinating. Now, how is that going with how they see themselves as worker versus employee?
Well, I think the experience of starting to decide some aspects of the business in terms of what will the name be. How did they decide the name? Well, deciding the name took a long time because it was a collaborative process where everybody chimed in. And first they came up with names and they talked about what the names meant. And then they took a vote and picked one. So, these things take time, but I try to engage folks in processes that allow them to kind of start to change how they see themselves in a given situation. In this case, it's employment. So there's been that aspect of it. And I think going to Philadelphia this summer, and they have a really robust amount of co-ops there. And so the women got to meet the actual members of the co-op, like Child Space, which has been around since the 1980s. And they're doing well and very stable. And so they got to meet them. But then we went to a consumer co-op. We met members there. And so one of the themes that we saw across them was that co-ops come together to address a community problem, whether it's, or a disease like you were talking about. You're looking at how to address it in different ways. And the one way we do it is by people coming together. And in our case, it was the Child Care Cooperative.
Okay, you have 2 jobs, maybe more.
I don't know. I don't count. I just do it.
So you're a community organizer, and you're organizing your community to form co-ops to solve community problems or community diseases. You also are in a NIH doing research. So the question I want to ask you is, do you like what you do?
Yes, absolutely.
Take both of those, NIH and the community organizing. What do you like about the NIH job, and what do you like about the community organizing job?
For the NIH job, me as a brain tumor survivor and going through that experience, we go through some traumatic thing in our lives and we can hold on to it and kind of like stay there. My career at the NIH gives me an opportunity to translate that experience into the research I do and to give a voice to people who are affected by cancer. What's it like to be in the ICU and your mouth is all dried up and you can't even talk? Like, what does that feel like? And what's it like for your caregivers and your family? Like, all of that experience I get to channel into my research. And I consider that a blessing. And each time I get to work, in particular with patients and survivors or caregivers, I consider that a blessing because I'm giving them a voice and I'm acknowledging their experience. And I get to make it come alive and share it with my colleagues and, publish papers about it and just really get the word out in terms of what that's like for people. And for me, it's just a blessing that I actually get to do that and to listen to people. And I didn't have cancer. I can't say that I did. But I understand the fear of it might come back. I still deal with that fear of my brain tumor coming back. And, for people with cancer, they're in remission for a period. There's a 5-year milestone. That's like the big one, right? For different kinds of cancer, like breast cancer. So I relate to a lot of their experience, and it's just such a blessing for me. And it gives me a sense of purpose in life to channel that experience into something that gives people a voice. So that's my NIH career, which I really love. Mm-hmm. And so that's
community organizing?
The community organizing for me, when you work in government, you're at such a high level. You don't really get to see, you published a study or you did some research and here you go. You really don't get to see how that touched people's lives. And I'm sure it does. My research I know has impacted people across the country and all of that. But to actually see like what community organizing gives me is the opportunity to connect with people, to see their perspective, and to create solutions for an issue that they're having, and empowering them with the ability to say, yes, I want to fix it in this particular way. And for me, that experience is also a blessing because I get to see actual change in community. And that's something to be cherished because it doesn't happen all the time. So it's something I really value and I love to do. I love both my quote unquote jobs, so to speak. It really inspires me to keep on going, and it gives me that energy. And I don't consider it a job. It's kind of like part of who I am and what I do.
Yes. Now you also inspire me. So I love what you do and how you enunciate it, how you explain it. I'm almost at a loss of words.
Yeah. So to take this opportunity, since we're both on the radio right now, is one of the needs that the Co-Familia Childcare Cooperative that we're looking for is a space to house the cooperative in Northwest D.C. The women, some of them have at least 15 years of licensing in child care. Others are just starting out, but we need a space for them to work out of, like an established location. So that's really what we're looking for. And I'm sorry to be so opportunistic, but
come on, no. Sorry, please keep going. I had to pull out what was the name and how you get a hold to. I had to get that out of you for LEDC. So yes, I was going to come back to that. So go ahead, please.
Yeah. So the women, what we need now is a place to house the cooperative. It could be a church space. It could be a business space. I know a lot of businesses now have on-site childcare, and so we're looking for those opportunities. And again, I'm not a member of the childcare cooperative. I'm just one of the organizers, and I'm supporting the effort to the best of my ability. So
there's no space in the 83 unit housing co-op?
Yeah, we do. We have vacancies. We have about 8 vacancies for folks who want to move in. And you have to be income qualified to move in, not just anybody, because we want to make sure this housing remains affordable for people who make a certain amount of money, who don't make too much money, but it has to be for folks who really can't afford anything more.
But my question is, could one of those apartments be turned into the Child Care Development Center?
That would cost a lot of money. We've actually looked into that. It would cost about $2 million. And it would take about just the rehab work and to build it out and everything would take about 3 years. And the need is now. The need is set it up now and provide these jobs now. And, while that could be a long-term project, this is a current need that the women have. They need a stable job now. So we have to address, and this is what they shared with us, is that they want a good, stable jobs now. They don't want to wait 2-3 years down the line. So that's why we're proposing this. How much
space do you need? Any square feet?
I think, I'm not really too familiar with space areas. We're actually looking at that right now because there has to be a certain ratio for so many kids.
Yep.
A child to adult ratio and all of that. So we're looking at that. But we're looking at maybe a basement of a church or, half a floor in a given building or something like that. But again, we're starting that process just now. All right.
Sylvia, we only have another minute and a half or so. And let me tell you a couple of things because I like to talk with you and work with you later. Oaks Management, Inc. is looking to become a worker cooperative. And we are looking at ways of lowering the cost of management. And the only way that we've seen to do that is something called shared management, where we would work with the housing cooperative and that maybe they would pay the bills. And with technology that would would set it up so that it feed right into the system so we could do reports. But there may be ways of somebody paying the bills, which would lower what we would have to do, or this co-op would have to do, is some ways that maybe help with the maintenance. The main thing I've found that people don't want to do is collect money from people because that's what they're doing with their neighbors or against their neighbors, and perhaps even putting them out. So we would do that. So it's looking for ways of how to share this process of this work, so that and not be profit driven in the management company in a way that lowers the cost and give good management. So I'd like to talk to you about that later. And
great.
Our minute and a half is up. Thank you so very much.
Thank you so much, Vernon. It's been great talking to you.
All right. We'll keep talking. Everybody else, have a great cooperative week.
Washington, D.C.'s News Talk, 1450 AM WOL and 95.9 FM.